So in this course, I have done up to certain levels, so I just let you guys learn this, and I will join after that.
And in this video, we're just going to set up our initial application using Create Next App, and we're just going to clean some stuff up, some of the demo content, and then I have a download in this lesson with a folder called Resources, which look like this. It has an Assets folder, Images, Favicon, and we're going to be just bringing these into our project. All right, so let's start off by opening a terminal. Go to wherever you want to create this project. Make sure you have Node.js installed, and then we're going to run npx create-next-app at latest. Now, latest for me at this point is 15.0.3, and yours might be a later version. That's fine. As long as it's at least next 15, then you should be fine. So the project name, I'm going to call it ProStore, and then we're going to use TypeScript. We're going to use ESLint and Tailwind. And I'm going to say no to the source directory, yes to the app router, no to the TurboPack for NextDev, and then no for customizing the alias. All right, so it's going to set up our project with the React, React DOM, and Next.js dependencies, and then for our dev dependencies, all the stuff we chose, TypeScript, and ESLint, Tailwind, etc. All right, so now what I want to do is open up that folder in VS Code. So I'm going to use the code command and then the name of the directory, which is ProStore. And if you're using a different text editor, that's fine too. Now I'm going to I'm going to close this terminal up and open up my integrated terminal because that's what I'll be using. And we might as well run npm run dev. So that'll run the project, run the dev server for us. And that's going to be on localhost 3000 by default. It takes a couple seconds the first time you run it. And we're just going to see this landing page here. Now I'm assuming that most of you have at least some basic experience with Next.js. If not, that's okay. I'll just explain things as we go. But basically, in the root, we have a bunch of config files, so TypeScript, Tailwind, ESLint. We have the main Next.js config file, which we'll be adding some stuff to later. And then the app folder is where our pages go. So Next.js uses file-based routing. So let's say you want /about. You want to put an about page. You would create a folder called about with a page.tsx inside of it. All right, now it's TSX because we're using TypeScript. If you weren't, it would be JSX or JS. And a page is just a React component. So this page.tsx directly in the app folder, that's the root. So that's the home page. That's what we're seeing right here. Now I want to just completely get rid of all this, so we'll just wipe it out and we'll create a new component. And since I'm using the React Simple Snippets extension, I can do SFC, enter, and that's going to give me an arrow function style component. And I'm going to call this home page. And then in the return, it doesn't really matter, I'm going to put a fragment and just say ProStore. Okay, so that will change that up to just say ProStore. Now the layout.tsx, this is the layout that surrounds whatever page you're viewing. And the page is rendered where this children prop is. Okay, so here you can see the body tag, the HTML tag. We have this metadata object. This will add a title, description. You can put keywords, etc. And then we're just applying a font here to the body class name. It uses this Geist font, but I don't want to use this actually. I want to use what they used to use in this file, which is the Inter font. So let's get rid of this, and we're going to do curly braces, uppercase I, Inter. And that's going to be from Next Font Google. Okay, now since we're using that, we can get rid of these blocks here, and we're just going to say const inter lowercase I for the variable, and set that to inter, and then you can pass in some options here. I'm just going to say subsets, and then set that to an array with a string of Latin. And this is exactly what used to be in this file. Now to use that font, we're going to come down here, and let's get rid of that, and then inside here, we're going to say inter, so our variable, and then dot class name. Save it, and that will apply that inter font. And then we might as well update this stuff here. So get rid of the title. Let's say ProStore. We'll make this dynamic later on. And then for a description, I'm just going to say modern e-commerce platform built with Next.js. It doesn't really matter what you put here. I'll probably change it later. All right, now if we look at, well, we actually don't need this font folder. That's where that font that it was using is, so we can delete that. And then the global CSS, which is being imported right here, right? That has the Tailwind directives, and then you can put whatever custom CSS you want. Now, I actually have in the resources download, there's a folder called assets, and in that is a styles folder with a global CSS. This is what I want to use. So what I'm going to do is first of all, we're going to delete the global CSS that's in the app folder. And then that's going to break the application for a minute. But then we're going to bring the assets folder into the root. Let's copy folder. Right, so in assets now we have styles and global CSS, and of course it has the Tailwind directives, but then I just added some utility classes here as well. So wrapper, which will apply these Tailwind classes, flex start will apply these, and so on. And we have some H1, H2, H3 bold, and then just some variables for the root as well as for the dark class, because we're going to have a light and dark mode. And then down here we're just applying BG background and text foreground to body. So that's the global CSS. We're not going to have to touch that again. Now, to fix that error, we just want to import it from the correct place. So let's get rid of this stuff, and we're going to say @ that's the alias for the root, /assets /styles /globals.css. Save it, and now that should work. All right, now there's a couple other things in, that's not it. Where's the folder? So in resources, the favicon, I just have the little shopping cart icon, so I'm going to bring that right into the app folder and replace this favicon. Okay, so it looks like that, and if you do a hard refresh, you should see that favicon show up. And then the only other thing I have here is images. So in that, we have the sample products for later, the main logo, promo image, and some banners. So this images folder, I want to bring that into the public folder. And then these SVGs here that's in the public folder, we can delete those. We don't need those. All right, and that should do it as far as setup and adding our assets and so on. So in the next video, we'll start to talk about and implement ShadCN UI, which is a set of UI components that we're going to use throughout the course. Okay, so now we're going to start to set up ShadCN UI, which is the component library that we'll be using. And it's a little different than other component libraries like Material UI and Chakra UI, where you import all the components from a single package. With ShadCN, you first initialize it, and then you install the components separately with an add command. Now, as far as the components, you can look here. If you click on components on the left here, there's all different types of components. There's charts, there's avatars, there's date pickers, all kinds of interactive like draw menus and things like that. So we'll be using a bunch of this stuff. Now, the first thing we need to do, if you go to docs and then you go to installation Next.js, we need to initialize it with this init command. And then once we do that, it creates a components.json file. And then we can run this npx shadcn at latest add, and then whatever component we want to add or install, such as the button. All right, so let's go ahead and initialize it. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to open a new terminal because this one is running the server. And let's say npx shadcn at latest, and we want to just run init. Now this is going to ask us some questions. So which style would you like to use? There's New York and default. I'm going to select default. You can also choose a base color. I'm going to choose slate, and then yes for CSS variables. Now, depending on when you're watching this course, you might get this question here. It says, it looks like you're using React 19. Some packages may fail to install due to peer dependency issues in NPM. How would you like to proceed? We have two options. Now, we're getting this because React 19 is so new, and some packages haven't gone in and explicitly said that the dependencies that it's compatible with React 19. So you can force it, right? And what that does is it tells NPM to ignore any dependency conflicts entirely, and this option forces the installation. Now, you could potentially run into some issues here if dependencies rely on specific versions. Now, you have this option, use legacy peer depths, and this option tells NPM to ignore the peer dependency requirements of packages, because by default, NPM enforces strict compatibility for peer dependencies, and this flag it bypasses that check. And this is generally safer than using --force because it does respect the primary dependencies while ignoring only the incompatible peer dependencies. All right, so I'm going to choose to use the legacy peer depths. And again, if you didn't see that warning or that question, just ignore what I just said completely. All right, so now we have a components.json. That's what it created, and this has some of the stuff that we answered. It also has like the location of the Tailwind config and stuff like that. We don't have to do anything within that file. But now we can install components. So let's go ahead and install the button. I'm going to say npx shadcn at latest, and then add, and then whatever component, in this case, button. And what that'll do is it'll actually create a components folder. If you have one, it'll just use that, but I don't. It's asking that question, so let's say legacy peer depths. So yeah, it'll create the components folder with a UI folder, and all the ShadCN UI components you install will go in this UI folder. Now, this button TSX, we don't have to do anything here. You can come in and change like some of the variants or whatever, but for the most part, we're going to leave these alone and just use them. So to use it, just to give you an example, I'm going to go into our page, our home page here, and this is just temporarily. I'm not going to keep it, but just to show you, we add a button component, and I'm just going to use the auto import option here. and it's being imported from, as you can see, from that components UI button folder or file, and I'll just say button for the text. All right, so if we come over here and we look now, we have our button component. And obviously you would add your handlers and stuff, whatever you want to do with it, but that's essentially what we do is we install it with the add command. It gets put in the components UI folder, we bring it in, and we use it. All right, now I'm just going to undo that stuff, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video. Okay, so now we're going to look at groups and layouts. So as I showed you in the first video, this layout.tsx file, this wraps whatever page we're viewing. The page is rendered here in the children prop, and this is where our HTML and body tags and all that stuff go. Now, we can have multiple layouts, and what I want to do is have a root group that will have its own layout, and that root group will have I'd say most of the pages, the cart page, the products, the order page, all that stuff. Basically everything except the admin area. So to create a group, we just simply create a folder in the app folder, and we put parentheses around it. So root, we're going to call it. Now, this doesn't change the route. So for instance, if I didn't have parentheses here, then that folder would pertain to /root. But since it has parentheses, it doesn't. So if I put, let's say, a folder called cart in the root group, then that's still going to pertain to just /cart. It's not going to be /root cart because that's a group. It's not a regular route folder. All right, so in the root, we can have a separate layout. And that's what I want to do is create a new layout.tsx here, because this is where I want to bring in like the header and the footer. I don't want to bring the header and the footer into the main layout down here. I want to bring it into the root layout. So let's go ahead and just create just a standard React. Actually, you know what we'll do is copy from the layout, because I want it formatted just like the root layout here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that in, and it's still going to take in children, same thing, except we're not going to have the HTML and body tags and stuff like that, because the main layout takes care of that stuff. What I do want is I want to have a div here, so kind of a wrapper for any pages that are rendered in this layout, and it's going to have a class flex. Okay, so we're going to use flexbox, and then let's do h-screen, which is just height of the whole screen, and then let's make it a flex column, so flex call. Right, and then inside that we'll have our main tag, and then I'm going to give that a class of flex-1 and a class of wrapper, which is one of those utility classes that I showed you in the global CSS. And that's where our page is going to be output. So we want to have our children prop here. Make sure you have your curly braces. All right, and then when we create our header and footer, it'll be embedded here instead of in the main layout instead of this. All I want in the main layout for now is just the children prop, no divs or anything like that. Now I want the home page to use the root layout, and right now it's not because it's not in that folder. In fact, I'm going to just go in the root layout here, and I'm just going to put the text root. And if we look at the home page, we can't see that, right, because it's not using that layout. But what I'm going to do is take the home page, the page.tsx that's in the app folder, and move it to the root folder. And now, if you look at the page, it says root because now the home page is in that layout. And it also has some spacing around the Pro Store text due to these classes here. So let's get rid of the root text. We don't need that. Just wanted to show you that it is using that layout. Now we can close these up. And another thing I wanted to do is have some constants. Okay, so basically some global variables. And in the main layout, not the root, but in app/layout, which is this one here, I want the metadata, like the title and the description, I want those stored in a constants file. And you can also have them in your .env as well. So the constants file I'm going to put in the lib folder. So lib and then a folder called constants. And then inside that we'll have a file called index.ts. That way when we bring in constants, we can just bring it from lib/constants. We don't have to create or define a file name. So first thing I'm going to have here is an app name. So we want to export these variables. So we'll say export const, and these are going to be all uppercase. So app name, and I'm going to set that to Pro Store. Okay. Now I can bring this in the layout here. I can now import. And I should be able to bring in app_name from just lib/constants. And then we can come down here and we can replace that with, let's use some backticks here because I'm going to do something else as well. And we'll say app name. All right, and it should just still be Pro Store. If I add a 2 on this, then Pro Store 2, so we know what's coming from there. Also, I'd like to have it first check our environment variables. And right now we don't have a .env file, so let's create one. So .env in the root. And since this will be available on the client side, it's prefixed with next_public, and then let's say app_name, and let's set it to, just double quotes here, let's set it to Pro Store. And then what I want to happen here in the constants is first check process.env not node next underscore public underscore app underscore name, or then use ProStore. So it'll always look here first. If I put a 3 here, you see it's going to say ProStore 3. Okay, so it's always going to look here first. If this isn't here, then it'll just use this. And then I want to do the same thing with the description. So in constants, let's copy that down and let's change. So this, we'll just select this and change it to app underscore description. And then for the description, I'm just going to say, put whatever you want. Say modern e-commerce store built with Next.js. All right, and then I'm also going to have this. I'm going to have this in the .env as well. So here, copy that down, paste that in, and then change this to description. Okay, so we have that, and then the last thing I want is the server URL. So let's say export and const server underscore URL. Set that to process.env and then next public underscore server URL, or HTTP localhost port 3000. Okay, now this you do want to have in your .env. The other ones you don't really need to have there, but this one will access directly from here because when we deploy, we're going to want that to be different. Obviously, it's not going to be this value, right? It's going to be whatever your domain is. So here we're going to add next, say public, next public server underscore URL, and same thing. Okay, so now we have those 3 values set in the constants, and we have them set in the .env. And right now, for the title, we're setting it to app name. Now, I just want to show you something real quick. Let's say on our home page, we want to have a different title than just ProStore. So we can, and I know a lot of you know this, we can just export const metadata and set that to an object with a title, and let's say home. If I do that, now it just says home, right? It overwrites the layouts. But what if I want to have home, but then have a pipe character and then ProStore, the name of the app name, the name of the site? So what we can do is, instead of just setting this to app name, we can actually set title to an object, and we can use a template. And in that template, we'll put some backticks, and we can do %s, and that's going to represent whatever that page title is, but then we want to add on to it ProStore, like that. And then we can set a default as well. And the default is just going to be app underscore name. So now if I save it, now it says home, but it has that pipe character and ProStore. Okay, and I'm not going to keep that. Maybe we can add a title later, but we'll just go ahead and get rid of that for now, and it's going to be the default, which is ProStore. And then for the description, we'll just set that to app underscore description. Make sure that gets imported. So that was auto-imported. And then we can also set the metadata base, which is just the URL. So let's say metadata base. Set that to a new URL object and pass in the server underscore URL. Oh, I need to import it. So if it's not imported, what you can do is just hit command or control period. And right here it says update import from libconstants. We want to hit that, and that will auto-import it. So we close this up, both of these, and in the next video we'll start on our header and footer. So now we're going to create the header and the footer components, and the header will be changed and added to as the course goes on. The footer is very simple, so that's just kind of one and done. But what we're going to do is in components, we're going to have a folder called shared. And a shared component is just a component that has other components inside of it. So let's create in that a new folder called header. And in that, we'll create a new file called index.tsx, which is just the main header component. But then other things that we'll have in the header, such as the menu, the mode toggler, things like that, those will also go in this header folder. But index is the main component. So let's say SFC if you're using the React simple snippets, and we'll call this header. And for now, I'm just going to put in the return, we'll just put the text header. Okay, and I want to bring this in, and then we're going to bring it into the root layout, not the main layout. The main layout is just the app and then layout, but the root layout is in the root folder. So that's where we want this to go. So up at the top, let's import a header, and then we want to put this right above the main tag, like that. So we should now see the text header on the page. All right, now let's go back into header index.tsx. And we're going to be using some icons from Lucid React, so we do have to install that package. So npm install, and it's lucid-react. And then let's go ahead and bring those in. So we'll say import from Lucid React, and the two icons that I want right now are going to be the shopping cart icon and the user icon. Okay, so we'll bring those in, and then we're also going to be displaying the logo, so we want to use the Next.js image component, so let's bring that in. And we're also going to have links, so let's bring in the Next.js link component. All right, and then we're going to have a button, so I'm also going to import our button component from the component/UI/button, which is our shadcn component. And then I also want the app name because I'm going to put that next to the logo. So let's bring in app_name from libconstants. Okay, now we have some markup to write here. So it's going to return a header, HTML5 header component, and we're going to give it a couple classes. So tailwind classes, we'll do width full, and let's do border bottom or border B. Get rid of this text, and then within the header, we're going to have our wrapper utility class, and then flex between. Okay, and then in that div, we're going to use our flex start class, and that's where the link is going to go around the logo, right? Because I want to be able to click on the logo and bring us to the home page. So let's say link, and we want the href, so that's going to just go slash, and then we'll add a class name of flex start to align it to the star. All right, and then that link is going to wrap around the image, so let's use our image, and this is going to have for the source, let's set that to /images/logo.svg. Now, when you just point to /images, that's in the public folder, so you should have public images, and then you should have your logo SVG file. So that's what we're setting the source to. We have some other attributes to set here. For the alt, I'm going to set that to, let's do backticks, and I'm going to use the app name here. So app_name, and then I'll just put the text logo next to it. And then I'm also going to add a height and width. So height, we'll set that to, let's say 48, and then width, also set that to 48. And then finally, I'm going to set the priority to true, because it's the main image, and we'll get a warning in the console if we don't add that. Okay, and then next to it, I want to have the app name. So still within the link, but under the image, let's add a span. So span, and let's add the class of, I'm going to do hidden to begin with, because on small screens, I don't want to show the text because it'll clutter it up. Okay, and then let's say font-bold, and we'll do text-2XL for the sizing, and then margin left 3. Now I want it to show on large screens and up, so I'm going to add here LG:, and then let's say block. So it'll be hidden on anything smaller than large screens, that large breakpoint. And we just want to put in here the app name. All right, so if we save it, now you can see the logo, and it has a link to the home page. If I make it bigger, as soon as it hits that large breakpoint, then we see Pro Store. Now I want to have the buttons on the other side, so we want to go, let's see, where does this, want to go where this flex start ends, so right here. And then under that div, let's have another div with, we'll say space-x-2, which just adds a little space between the elements on the x-axis. And we're going to have two buttons. So let's add the first one, so it should be uppercase. So button. Now the button is going to have a link inside of it, because it's not an actual button with like a click handler. I just want to have a link inside of it. So we're going to add the asChild attribute or prop. And then we can change the look of the button by adding a variant. And I'm going to add a variant of ghost. Okay. And then inside the button, like I said, I want to have a link. So we're going to do link and set the href. This is going to be the cart button. So we'll just set it to /cart. And inside the link, I'm going to have the shopping cart icon. So let's bring that or embed that. And then, next to the shopping cart icon, we'll just have the text cart. Now I'm going to just take this button and copy it down. And this is going to be the sign in button. So the link, let's do sign-in. And it's going to be the user icon. So let's change this to user icon. And then for the text, we'll just say sign in. All right, so we'll save that, and there we go. So we have our sign in and our cart. Okay, so it looks good so far. Now let's create the footer, which is going to be very simple. We'll close up the header for now. Now the footer is not a shared component in the fact that it doesn't have any embedded components in it, so I'm just going to put it directly in the components folder. So we'll create footer.tsx. All right, and then we'll do sfc, call it footer, and let's also bring in the app name here. So I'll say import from the constants. We want app name, and And then I want to display the year, but I don't want to hard code it because the years change and you don't want to have to keep updating it. So let's just create a variable here and we'll call it current. Let's just call it current year. And I'm going to set that to a new date. And I want to get full year. Okay, that way we can just put that in. And let's use a footer component, or not a footer, a footer tag, HTML5 tag. And I'm also going to give it a border class. So let's say class name, we'll set it to border-t, border top. And then in that, we'll have a div with the class of P5, so some padding around it, and also flex-center. And then in that, we're going to have the current year. And next to that will be the app name. And then next to that, I'm just going to say all rights reserved. Reserved. And yeah, that should do it. So now we need to bring that into the root layout, just like we did the header. Just copy that down and take this and this, change that to footer. Actually, that's not in shared. Sorry, so we want to get rid of that shared. And then let's just put this under the main tag, so footer. Save it, and there we go. So now we have our footer. Cool. So that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to start to work on our theme toggler because I want to be able to have a dark theme and a light theme that we can switch.